We've got about half a season of data, and it does seem like there's some things we can start to infer. And unfortunately, that includes it's on the thumbnail. Alvin Kamara, is he the king of running backs? Let's talk about it today in the SPAGS rankings that you are going to see on the screen right now. Of course, what are the SPAGS rankings? The SPAGS rankings are compiled of the SPAGS Score. I don't know where these names came from. I don't know why it's branded after me. This has just been handed down from generation to generation. Basically, what I do, compile a bunch of key stats together, roll them up into one, efficiency stats, volume stats, all of it combined into one for every position, and we try to find out who are the top players according to these metrics. And what these can tell you is how these players are going to look the rest of the year. It doesn't just reflect their week 8 matchup. It reflects week 8, week 9, week 10, week 11. I can keep counting, but you get what I'm going for here. That's what we're trying to find. We're trying to find who are the superior players, who are the great spots, and who are the guys that are just kind of average with what they're doing. So let's talk about it here. And this one, I have to lead with running backs this week because this was a shocker to me. I've been very anti-Alvin Kamara over the course of this entire offseason. I've been very anti-Alvin Kamara in terms of just Kendre Miller getting opportunity, Jamal Williams being involved, Alvin Kamara starting the year suspended, Alvin Kamara looking dustier by the year. All of that doesn't matter. You know why? Because Alvin Kamara is getting 27 opportunities per game. Of course, that being rushes, that being targets. That's what Alvin Kamara is doing every single game. So it's hard to ignore that now that we're 4 games in. He's also getting 3.3 red zone rushes per game, 1.3 red zone targets, 9.8 targets overall per game. That is an elite workload for a guy who he himself is not elite. A 4.3% avoided tackle rate, negative 0.02 EPA per rush, negative 0.08 EPA per pass. Point being, Alvin Kamara himself is not that great of a player. But what he is doing in terms of the volume, in terms of the opportunity, in terms of the trust from this New Orleans offense that didn't change anything from when Sean Payton left. They just want to keep doing the same things, including the exact same players. Jimmy Graham, hello, he got signed there too. Point being, that's what Alvin Kamara represents. So can it go south? I think it should. I think we should see Kendre Miller get more work. I'm obviously biased, of course, with my best ball bags. I love rookie running backs, but I do think Alvin Kamara right now, this role is too good, especially in full point PPR. If you have a full point PPR league and you can get Kamara for a song and a dance, I would do it immediately. Kamara's workload is too good. It's stupid how good his role is. And he's, again, another guy like we talked about with Travis Etienne, who does not make the top 10, surprisingly. It's just consolidating the role instead of guys that start the year where it's like you have running back 2 involved, running back 3 involved. Any guys that start to consolidate the role more so, obviously, ignoring the injury components that can come with that, these guys are going to look better over the course of a year. They're going to be more guys that you can trust over the course of a year. And Alvin Kamara, I think, has fought off Jamal Williams, has fought off Kendre Miller. Miller wasn't even involved last game. This role for Kamara is really good, and I think he's a guy on every slate you probably want to have some exposure to because he can give you 30 PPR points pretty easily without even having what I would consider a good game. Christian McCaffrey, no surprise at number 2. He's getting a little bit less efficient, also a little bit less volume on the year, negative 0.03 EPA per rush, down to 22 intended touches per game. So that is the targets and the rushes put together. Still getting, though, 5.8 red zone touches per game. That's an elite workload. The biggest issue for him is the one that I've talked about a lot. And shout out to our pal Big Lenny, who loves to come in here and victory lap Christian McCaffrey having good games. Christian McCaffrey's usage is so high, which is why he's having these great games or, these usable games past 2 weeks before this last one. We're under 13 points. So, it's going to have some hit or miss there. The point being for McCaffrey is just this workload, this role, this opportunity in a good offense or what we perceive as a good offense is too good to ignore. I don't think the crush of volume is quite the same as Alvin Kamara. Clearly is involved. I do think as well that McCaffrey comes with a little more injury risk. We know he's had the calf strains in the past. We know he's recently had the oblique issues just a little bit. I mean, these guys are both pretty small, but Kamara has shown that he can kind of be durable over the course of time. McCaffrey, we do know he's been durable for a while now, but I tend to think that the other shoe is about to drop at any point, coming up soon. So for McCaffrey, hard to argue it. Best running back in football, I think, in terms of the talent and opportunity. But because his opportunity is down, he's getting 5 less intended touches per game than Alvin Kamara. That's hard to overcome and just the pure metrics here of the SPAGS rankings and the SPAGS scores that I say with such seriousness as though these are not whimsical things that I created just to make my life easier to distill this stuff down. Number 3, Kenneth Walker. Kenneth Walker, I thought, would take a little bit of a while to jump up to the 3 spot because of less efficiency overall, because some guys have been hurt, because some guys have also not been good. We're going to talk about Tony Pollard in a minute. Oh, actually, I fucked this up. I have Tony Pollard on this list twice. So, there we go. My data prep before the show, my graphic prep really has some flaws. But Tony Pollard moved up in the rankings this week just because he was okay and had opportunity. He went down in terms of the SPAGS score. So that's how this week looked. Kenneth Walker, he had great opportunities this week. He just sucked with it. So kind of a downer, still at 100 yards in that game against the Cardinals. Obviously, one of the biggest chalk busts of the year at 50% ownership. Like we speculated here, he might get to Raheem Mostert levels. He got there. That said, he's still a great player. Certainly going to be something moving forward with Zach Charbonnet. I think can chip away at the role, but Charbonnet being out, at a certain point, these guys have to be on the field and show something, or at least on the practice field and showing something. And when you have your backup running back, your rookie running back who comes with draft capital, and he's just not showing out in a major way, not getting out there, again, even in practice, even on the scout team, like he's not doing anything that's going to make them want to put him out there. That's where Kenneth Walker's role gets a little bit more secure. So I'm comfortable having him in a 3 spot now, again, with the caveat that I do think Charbonnet deserves some work over the course of a year, but we've now gotten past the bye. We've now gotten Charbonnet hurt. These are things that are going to bode well for Walker throughout the rest of the year. Shout out to our guy Tyler here, all the OGs. Appreciate you guys in the Squirt Squad being here. Of course, the SPAGS Rankings video, I know, again, like this isn't my view hounding video. This is a process-based video where it's all about me setting the table for the stuff throughout the week, setting the table for the rest of the season as well. So I appreciate all you guys who are here with me. This is just what I do, what I look at, and I think trying to make content out of it is all I can do, as I do with everything here on Splash Play, Monday to Friday at 11 a.m. That is what we do here, grinding out the season as we go. Tomorrow, showdown video, of course, which everybody loves. David Montgomery in at number 4, and we'll correct number 5 and 6 as we go as well. David Montgomery, hopefully he'll get back in soon. The part that I worry about with him is Jahmyr Gibbs coming back in and seizing just enough of this role to make it tougher for Montgomery to get where he needs to go. But on the year, Montgomery, 20.8 intended touches per game, 5.4 red zone rushes per game. That's just elite usage. He's actually been pretty good with them as well. 17% avoided tackle rate on run plays. Actually a 50% avoided tackle rate when he's getting a catch. So definitely some good signs by Montgomery in terms of, I think people have perceived him to not have a lot of juice. And in reality, he's really getting a lot of success no matter what they're doing. And his 8-man box number is also fairly impressive, though I don't have those in front of me right now. Montgomery's role, I think just the biggest risk is still Gibbs getting out there doing more. I think the Lions are still going to view these guys differently. If Montgomery's out, they're going to give Gibbs the role and see what he can do. And I think his pass game work certainly deserves more snaps. But for Montgomery, though, that red zone work, just over 5 red zone rushes per game is just so much to ignore. So I think for Montgomery, I don't think that goes to Gibbs at any point. So worst case scenario is he ends up pure Jamal Williams. Right now, he's still fancy elevated Jamal Williams, and we'll see how that goes when he does get back out there with 3 rib injuries. Tony Pollard in at number 5 and number 6 here, but the real one is number 5 that I did not correct. He's up this week barely. That's what I mentioned earlier, where he moved up in terms of his SPAG score, which again is a compilation of the volume metrics, some of the EPA metrics as well, especially in the red zone too. That's included. So point being, Tony Pollard moved up just because he's been okay over the course of a year, but his number actually went down a little bit, which wouldn't be a surprise. He's now down to just 4.8 red zone touches per game, or red zone rushes per game, 1 red zone target per game. There was a point where he was over 7, over 8 per game. Now we are coming down a little bit more. This Cowboys offense, we saw some things against the Chargers that maybe would portend them being willing to pass a little bit more, which would not be great for Tony Pollard. Obviously, anything that draws attention away from him, a guy that really is not going to have a good time against 8-man boxes, is going to be a positive. But I think for him, he's just such a volume guy that you really do want to see him getting to a large crush of volume. And it does feel like we're going the opposite way now, just 20.8 intended touches per game. The fact that he's above 20 is going to be a positive sign. Obviously, any running back that's getting you 20 touches is a good thing, but or aggressive offense, one that does seem like it's maybe wanting to pass more, but not in as exciting of a way as it did last year. And a lot of just runs up the gut for Tony Pollard. I thought there was encouraging usage for him last game against the Chargers, getting targeted downfield. To me, was the biggest thing that jumped out. But for Pollard, I think the biggest concern is really just that he's just not that great this year. Negative 0.11 EPA per rush, 0.1 EPA per pass. So he is positive in the pass game, but a low avoided tackle rate is a 5.2% avoided tackle rate, a 20% when he's in the pass game. So that is a positive for him, but just really not the best situation for Tony Pollard, I think, and not one where he's taking the most advantage of it. So that's sort of a tough thing combined to move up the rankings as we go. Kyron Williams would be the true number 6 here. Zach Moss would be the true number 7, but I'm taking those guys out because of injury concerns. Austin Eckler coming up after them. And Austin Eckler, I think, is really standing out to me as a guy that in these last few weeks, and it's been matchups that are a little bit tough. Cowboys, Chiefs D, that's one of the best in the league. Those are things that are not going to be great for Eckler, but he is down now to a negative 0.02 EPA per rush, negative 0.07 EPA per pass, down to 3.3 red zone rushes per game, along with 1.3 red zone targets, which is still a great workload. But it's not as good as he got in that first game of the year where the Chargers looked like a world-beating team, running behind Eckler, running with Josh Kelly as well. This week, it felt like Kelly took a lot of the workload away from Eckler. That's not a great thing to see either. Eckler, certainly we know about the injury concerns. We know about the contract concerns for him. Those are things that are definitely not going to be the best for him in terms of wanting to push himself to getting 20, 30 touches. But now he is safely nestled under 20 touches per game. Hard for Eckler, and really hard for me to love Eckler, especially, in terms of a less efficient player, as it seems like he's getting to be. Hard to love him if he's going to be under 20 touches a game. So if he keeps being priced like an 8K, a 9K player on DraftKings, I would have a really hard time getting there just because of Eckler, again, being less efficient, this offense not using him the same ways, and he himself coming off injury. It does feel like they maybe don't want to press him into action too much, or he doesn't want to get himself pressed into action too much again, and another contract year for him coming up. Josh Jacobs, we are in the part of this tier where it's just a lot of guys getting a lot of touches and not doing a lot with it. Jacobs, 22.6 intended touches per game. Saquon Barkley, 23.5 intended touches per game. These guys both are getting good work overall. 3.6 red zone rushes for Jacobs, 0.9 red zone targets for Jacobs, 4 red zone rushes for Barkley, 0.8 red zone targets for Barkley. But these guys are the thing that I talk about with running backs all offseason when I'm drafting best ball teams. It's that these guys are just not like good players. Like they're not doing positive things when they touch the ball. Jacobs, negative 0.15 EPA per rush, negative 0.19 EPA per pass. Barkley, negative 0.17 EPA per rush, negative 0.24 EPA per pass. Like these guys are slightly worse versions of Alvin Kamara, but they're also just guys getting a lot of work and not doing a lot with it. So when their team is bad, things are going to run bad. When their team is competitive, they're going to be okay. Like Saquon this week was okay. I thought it was probably one of the best spots he's had so far this year going against the Commanders. Puts up 17 points in that game, PPR wise. So for me, it's like he can get there if the Giants are running hot, if the offense is flowing, if things are working like they're supposed to. But if that's not happening, like Barkley's not going to have an outlier game in an adverse matchup. And same thing for Jacobs as well. So that's where things are bad. And Jacobs comes the extra caveats of the Raiders' motivations, Devontae Adams, the QB situation, the team itself. That was a listless effort here. And I thought Brian Hoyer acquitted himself well in that first quarter. And then it just kind of plummeted downhill and Jacobs wasn't involved. And I just don't know that it gets better for Jacobs, at least for Barkley. They keep starting Tyrod. I think that he should hope that Daniel Jones doesn't get back out there because Daniel Jones can't handle the pressure the Giants are allowing, 40% pressure rate they were allowing with him at QB. He can't handle that right now. Tyrod at least can. So tough to bench or pseudo bench your $150 million QB or whatever Daniel Jones got paid. But I do think for a guy like Saquon, he probably wants Tyrod out there, and Darren Waller as well. Two guys that have been benefiting recently that are very highly drafted that I think you don't want to see Daniel Jones get back in the mix and have to have him be accountable for. Isaiah Pacheco comes in at number 10. Again, just had a Travis Etienne. The reason would be that slightly more touches per game for Travis Etienne, less red zone work per game for Etienne. So Etienne's touchdown run, I do feel like is a bit unsustainable. He's just getting 1.9 red zone rushes per game, no red zone targets per game. Pacheco getting 2.9 red zone rushes per game, 0.7 red zone targets per game. So a more clearly defined red zone role. Pacheco as well, a little bit more efficient. 0 EPA per rush, which is fine. Of course, expected points added means like what you're trying to do is you're adding more points on with your performance. So if you move the ball 10 yards, in a situation where a team normally gets 5, you're adding a certain amount of points on. So that's where Pacheco's doing well. The issue is that he's not converting it to a lot of touchdowns. He's got 75% of his team's rushing touchdowns, but in a Patrick Mahomes offense, a high pass rate over expectation offense, Pacheco isn't necessarily getting there. But I think he's good enough to justify just saying that he is a top 10 running back right now. He's good with every touch. He's getting a 0.32 EPA per target as well. So he's probably part of why he's put some distance between him and Jerick McKinnon as well, is that he's likely a better pass catcher at this point in the game than Jerick McKinnon is. So McKinnon's still in there in the third and long down situations, but Pacheco can maybe take some of that role in high leverage spots. But I think for Pacheco, I get why he would be above ATN for me. I think for a lot of you guys out there, you might disagree with that one, but they're pretty close. 23.5 SPAGS score for Pacheco, 23.4 SPAGS score for Travis Etienne, and then not that far behind Devon Achane at a 23.1, of course, coming down after the one injury-riddled game that he had. That's how it looks right now at top 10 running backs. So I'll keep it going here. We're making good time on the running backs, of course, my least fun group of players to talk about always. Let's talk about the QBs. And the QBs did not move around very much, where there wasn't a big sexy change here that occurred like there was at running back. Going to Alvin Kamara at number 1 to me was a big shocker. At QB, once again, it is going to be Jalen Hurts, number 1 overall. And it just comes down to the fact that his numbers really didn't move much this week. Negative 0.04 EPA per pass still, 0.04 EPA per drop back still. But the thing that really stands out with Jalen Hurts, again, I have on the screen 10.6 rushes per game, 3.6 of which inside the red zone. That is the highest mark in the league, which I don't see that changing unless Lamar really goes on a bender. For Jalen Hurts, the rushing upside, always a big thing. The deep shot upside for a fantasy QB, also very important. But the thing for Jalen Hurts is just that he's still negative EPA per pass. Like last year, he was a positive EPA per pass guy. So I think there is still more of a ceiling for him to hit. So great usage, great execution in terms of the play calling overall. And Hurts can get better if he just is a little better with what he can control. Obviously, had that big pick six against the Dolphins this past weekend, which was not great for him. He's done that seemingly in like every game. So that's a thing that really hurts Jalen Hurts. While still, the fact that his numbers are this good while he's making these kind of egregious mistakes, I think is a positive sign for him. But I think you just can't ignore deep shots, red zone rushing equity overall. Jalen Hurts has that in spades, and I don't know how he doesn't end up as the number one overall quarterback in the SPAGS rankings this year. Patrick Mahomes number two, so he is sort of the proof of the other sides of things where you can be a really efficient passer and can still rank pretty well for me. Patrick Mahomes, 0.14 EPA per pass, 0.19 EPA per drop back. Those are both two of the highest marks in the league and actually might be the highest for, besides Brock Purdy and EPA per drop back. So Patrick Mahomes doing it. He's also doing it while he's getting 42 drop backs per game. So the ball's in his hands a lot, and he's great with it. That is a winning combination for a QB in fantasy and in general, and also to have that upside. Not a lot of guys can put up 35 fantasy points without a ton of rushing equity like Patrick Mahomes did. He could actually get a little better, too, in terms of getting it downfield. 3.7 deep shots per game, 0.33 APA on those. We have seen a lot of him missing with Justin Watson on the year, so maybe getting Rashee Rice out there more, a guy who's been catching absolutely everything, will be a positive for Mahomes. But I think really for Mahomes, he's just been great. And he doesn't have to do as much this year because that defense is so good. And that's maybe the one thing capping a ceiling. Like maybe if he were out there slinging it for, 50 dropbacks a game, then he would really be able to pass Jalen Hurts and stay in that number one spot. But with a good defense, he just doesn't have to get into that action quite as much. So I think that's where Patrick Mahomes has his one flaw. But again, 4.7 rushes per game, a 0.9 EPA per rush is actually the best mark at QB as well. These are good things for Mahomes. He's doing everything he can. The team's running well right now. But I think for fantasy, you would like to see him pressed into really needing to push the ceiling more so. And I don't know you're going to get that other than matchups where the other team can really put up points against a tough Chiefs D. Josh Allen moves up to number 3 this week. And the thing that stands out again is he's just not getting that workload of a Jalen Hurts, of Josh Allen in previous years. That's the part that stands out because he's been great at everything. 0.11 EPA per pass, 0.12 EPA per dropback, only a negative 0.2 EPA when he's getting pressured. And he's got a 7% touchdown rate when he's getting pressured as well. So that's a pretty good sign that he's able to handle the pressure well and get the ball where it needs to go. But 3.7 deep shots per game, 4.1 rushes per game, only 1.6 of which in the red zone. That is not the Josh Allen we've known and loved. That is not the Josh Allen that gives you the 40 fantasy point ceiling. This is right now a Josh Allen that gives you a reasonable 25 to 30 fantasy point ceiling. And that's great. Like that's still a great place to be. But with where you drafted him, I do think you want to see the potential for him to get a 50-point game. The only way that happens is if this Bills D continues to get worse. They are down Tre'Davious White. They are down some middle linebackers. Like it could keep getting worse for them as we saw, in previous matchups. But this week against the Bucs, I just don't expect Josh Allen to have to go above and beyond. And I don't think the play calling right now is making him go above and beyond. But we'll see. I think the shift to more 11 personnel with Dawson Knox being out, Dalton Kincaid being in the mix as the regular tight end, maybe that opens things up more, gives you some 3 wide receiver sets that could make him press the ball downfield more. So perhaps some variability in how it goes moving forward. But this approach on the year, it's just not the same Josh Allen. Like he was previously in this Hurts, Lamar Fields tier of work and also getting the downfield work as well and being good at it. And if he's not going to press it in that way, it could be the NFL, could be the play calling, whatever the case may be. It's just not the same situation for Josh Allen. So he's a top 3 QB. Hard to ignore that. But for fantasy, I just don't know how he makes a big leap. He's 12 points behind in SPAGS score. That's a pretty big jump he'd have to make to even get to number 2, let alone number 1. Lamar Jackson moving up the ranks as well. Obviously, another good game for him. He's now gotten to a flat 0 EPA per pass, 0.03 EPA per dropback. The biggest value that he's going to have, though, is going to be in the run game. He is now up to 9.9 intended rushes per game or rushes per game, 52 yards per game, which is kind of nuts. He's got 12 more yards per game than Jalen Hurts does, 2.6 red zone rushes per game. So less red zone work, less tush pushes for our guy Lamar, but still he's been really good with it. And I think what we're really seeing with him is he started really slow. Like Jalen Hurts started slow. Lamar started really slow. And we've talked about some of the concerns with that, where how he there were reports that he had a hard time adapting to Todd Monken's offense. It does seem like he's figured that out. If we're going to go off at least this one explosion game against the Lions, we now have a couple of weeks of him putting up the best games that a lot of defenses have given up. The Browns didn't give up a ton to him, but still had his best game, or gave up the best game that they've given up was going against Lamar. So I think with Lamar, I have no concerns about his outlay. I guess the biggest concerns I would have is that the deep shot's not looking that great. Hasn't gotten a touchdown on a deep throw yet. Only 3.3 deep attempts per game. But it does feel like he's at least controlling the offense in a way that's going to benefit him. And the amount of rushing upside, that was a concern in the offseason, was that he might not run as much. In this offense, it does benefit a passer who could stay in the pocket. He's running a lot. He did his most damage running and really threatening the run against the Lions. That was why a lot of things opened up downfield for the other guys in that offense. So I think for Lamar, he's in a really good situation. I don't know that he has the explosive ceiling of a Jalen Hurts or a Mahomes or a Josh Allen week to week. When the situation does benefit him, though, I think he absolutely can give you, as we saw, give you Millie Maker winning weeks, can give you best ball winning weeks. He is a player that I think you have to feel really good about right now. And especially if you have a Mark Andrews as a Flowers, like that is a pretty good alpha stack. And maybe Gus Edwards too, like a 4-man Raven stack with Edwards, Andrews, Flowers. I think that could be pretty good. Baker Mayfield keeps hanging in. And the reason Baker Mayfield keeps hanging in, because this baffles me too. I know you see a list of these elite names, and at number 5 is Baker Mayfield, and you immediately want to question the credibility of the stat that I made up entirely for myself. The reason that Baker Mayfield is doing this, because A, he drops back a lot per game, 37.8 dropbacks per game. He's also a positive EPA guy in every situation, 0.01 EPA per pass, 0.03 EPA per dropback. In pressure situations, only a negative 0.2 EPA, which is actually okay. 4% touchdown rate when he's getting pressured as well. 4.3 deep throws per game, 4.7 deep rushes per game. That's why Baker Mayfield is here, is that he's a little more involved throwing the ball downfield. We do see that be his primary way to drive value. We do see him running a little bit more as well. Had one really nice run to get a first down in that last game for the Bucs as well. Like Baker's getting high value situations that are really paying off for him relative to Baker Mayfield, but only 0.3 red zone rushes per game. And this is one where I don't know how to differentiate the quality of rushes in terms of my metrics. It's just kind of a volume thing. So like Lamar is 4.7 rushes. If Lamar ran 5 times in a game, his 5 rushes would be infinitely more valuable than Baker Mayfield, because he might run for 20 yards. Baker, though, is going to run for a first down on 1 to 3 of those 5 rushes. So like he's doing something valuable, but he's not like a deep play guy who's going to run for this 50-yard touchdown. And I think that's where Baker's probably a little bit too highly ranked in terms of what I'm putting out here. But in terms of being a stackable QB, a guy who's actually being competent in every situation, if he's in good matchups, I think you actually can go to Baker and have some confidence in it for DFS slates, for double stacks, for all that stuff. And really relative to best ball, like he's probably the most underdrafted QB relative to what these guys have done all year. Baker hasn't been putting up huge fantasy spike weeks, but he's keeping an offense running. You would have gotten to Mike Evans a little bit more. Maybe you'll get the one Chris Godwin spike week at some point. Kate Otten, also same thing. That's where I think Baker Mayfield does provide value, is that at some point you expect these things to run a little better for somebody who's not Mike Evans. And I think that's where Baker is you can justify the 5th overall ranking, even though it does stand out like a sore thumb. Justin Herbert fell this week, but still looking good on the year. 0.04 EPA per pass, 0.04 EPA per dropback, 41 dropbacks per game. Under pressure, getting a little bit worse, negative 0.5 EPA per pressured dropback as well. 14.7 pressured dropbacks per game is also towards the higher end. It's not as bad as a guy like, wait, is that true? Wait, hold on. Oh, no, Andy Dalton faced 26 pressured dropbacks in his starts. So not quite that bad, but still seeing a lot of them if you're just under 15. He's handling it okay, though. Again, negative 0.5 EPA, 4.5% touchdown rate. The deep throws and the run attempts are there, though. 5 deep throws per game. That's more than Tua, more than Jalen Hurts, more than most of the guys we've already talked about. 4.7 rushes per game. Also pretty good as well. Puts him in that Baker Mayfield category with, I think, a little more juice to get there. 1.3 red zone rushes as well for Herbert. A positive thing compared to a Baker Mayfield style of rusher. So I think there's still upside for Herbert. I guess the issue for me is really that we have seen that he's not going to have the explosive ceiling, especially in games where it's not a layup defense they're going out against. So that's the biggest flaw for Herbert. And Keenan Allen's getting a little bit less efficient too, whether that be because of defenses keying in on him more. Obviously, we know Mike Williams out there. Could also be Keenan slowing down a little bit just because of the age and the fact that he is playing a lot more outside than he ever has in his career. These are things that could affect Herbert adversely as well. But there still feels like maybe there's a level to unlock with Herbert where getting Quentin Johnson involved, if he can do anything, I think would be a positive for him. Getting the tight ends more involved. Gerald Everett's been a player that has some explosion and some ability to get out there and make some good plays. place. Like, it's been all Josh Palmer carrying that offense right now, and I don't think that's the best situation for Herbert. He needs this thing to be running like a machine where Eckler's getting some nice checkdowns that go for good plays. Palmer's getting some nice diversionary kind of routes. Allen's getting what he gets, and then the tight ends are involved. Like, he needs all this to be humming. And I think right now the only thing that's really humming is Josh Palmer, and that's going to be pretty tough for him. Tua, probably a little bit lower than he should be, but it really comes down to the rushing stuff here. He's just such a negative rusher, but in terms of a passer, 35 dropbacks per game. And I think that's part of the issue too, is that he's just dropping back a little bit less because the game scripts haven't been there, obviously, for Miami every single week. So 35 dropbacks per game, only 3.7 deep shots per game, only 2.1 rushes per game. So he's not doing a lot of the things that can add that floor value to him as a QB that'll give you where, like if the Dolphins are crushed, if the Dolphins are putting up 40 points, Tua is probably going to get there. If the Dolphins are putting up 20, he's not going to be a guy that gives you 5 easy rushes for 50 yards. He's not going to be a guy that can do that kind of thing. And that's where I think Tua is the most hurt. But still 3.7 deep shots per game, good for a 0.74 EPA, better than pretty much every QB in the league. That's a positive thing for Tua. I just wish that they were always like pedal to the floor, able to get it downfield, able to do the things like they did against the Broncos. They're not able to do that in every possible matchup. So that's something for Tua where you really want to see him have the ability to put up 50 points in a game. And that's obviously, that's a fucking dumb thing to say out loud. Obviously, anytime a QB is on a team where they're going for 50 points, it's going to be a good situation. But for Tua in particular, like, he needs to be a part of an offense that's putting up 400 yards, that's getting 4 passing touchdowns, because he's just not going to run for one and give you that kind of out there. So that's the biggest issue. And it's really hard to underscore. Like, a -1 flat EPA per rush player is Tua right now. So he's basically removing a point every time that he tries to run the ball. That's not a good thing for a QB. He's not a modern QB in that one way. He's actually closer to, I would say, a Stafford and a Cousins in that respect, where he's just going to get there, pure pocket stuff, obviously more inventive offense, but just not a guy that's going to create value for himself. He's going to be a guy that creates value from the structure of a scheme. Check out the comments here. Shouts to the chat as always. I'll see you later tonight. Yes, I will be on Stochastics NBA Deeper Dive later today. So there we go. So I got to prep my NBA once I finish this stream. Lots of sports going on right now, and Lord knows I'm going to do them all. And KC's secondary is good. KC is good everywhere. They get pressure inside. They do just enough of everything, taking things away. They really are. It's a tough compliment for Patrick Mahomes, because for us to get the Patrick Mahomes we want to see, you just want to see him be out there in like 50-50 kind of games. And instead, he's just in games now where he just doesn't have to do as much. He's going to be great with whatever passes he does throw out there, but there's not as many of them. And a lot of them are going to Kelsey, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Matthew Stafford coming in here in the 8th spot, just the vessel for Kupp and Puka is what I have on the screen. That's pretty much how I view him. He doesn't add a lot in the run game. There's nobody else who's really having outlier days. Tutu has made some good plays. Higby's made some good plays, but a lot of this just comes down to Stafford being a guy that keeps the schedule running on time. 0.04 EPA per pass, 0.05 EPA per dropback, 41 dropbacks per game. Basically, if you see Kupp and Puka have a good game, Stafford's going to have a good game. If you see one of Kupp or Puka have a good game, Stafford probably closer to like a 20-ish point game, maybe an 18-point game. That's not enough to get you there. So you really do kind of need him to be a part of these double stacks, to be a part of something that's really outlying in a major way as like a collective group. And I think that's where Stafford, makes it fine for DFS, makes it fine for best ball. But in terms of what you guys are looking at in terms of just every single week, like, he's not a guy that can create value, and it's not as sexy of an offense as, say, the Dolphins one is, where the Rams aren't putting up 500 yards in a game. Like, they're putting up, good 400 if things are really running well. And then the hope is that you get 150 from Kupp and Puka, and you could really make a nice double stack. But it is really Stafford to me. It's not him. I think he's more of a Brock Purdy in terms of the situation overall. And speaking of more like a Brock Purdy, number 9 is Brock Purdy. It's just the pace for him. And this is something that I saw our guy Pat Thorman tweeting about over, I think, on Monday Night Football, where Brock Purdy, like, just the clock running down over and over and over again, slow pace of play for the Niners. Not a good thing for him, because he's really good. He's getting 0.24 EPA per pass, 0.24 EPA per dropback. When he's running, it's not running very often, but he's running 2.9 times per game, good for a 0.35 EPA. This motherfucker just needs more plays. I don't know that I need to say motherfucker there. But Brock Purdy just needs to be getting more opportunities to do what he can do best. And it does feel like they're kind of keeping the governor on him, keeping him leashed a little bit more than they probably should. Only 2 deep throws per game, but he's got a 0.6 EPA there. Like, Brock Purdy's been great. Like, I know I still think he's a vessel of like this Niners offense, Kyle Shanahan play calling and all that. I don't think it's like him as this amazing player by himself that you could plug in any situation to be this great. But he's been great in this Niners offense. And they want to play this risk-averse football. They want to rely on the defense. And the defense is not the defense of the last few years. We've now seen 2 pocket passing statue QBs pick them apart in Stafford and Cousins. And I think the one change that the Niners could do would just be more plays, more play volume, getting plays out there faster. I don't know. Like that's certainly, I think the thing they're missing right now is just more action for these guys because the offense is good. It's just the offense is kind of slogging it out and not playing to its full capability because they were able to win like that last year. And this year, I don't think they could win that same way because the defense just isn't as good. So for Purdy, I think he can make a move up. If he gets to 40 dropbacks a game, he's probably a top 5 QB in the SPAGS score. For right now, though, he's got to be number 9 just because this is like being 30 dropbacks a game is just, you're not competitive. You're 10 less dropbacks than Hurts, 12 less than Mahomes, 9 less than Allen. Like you can't, you need those 9 plays. Like you need those 9 plays real bad. Jordan Love comes in at number 10, and he is where another guy, obviously Baker Mayfield at number 5, I think is one you could really go, all right, what's going on here? Jordan Love, it speaks to my process. I think that Jordan Love makes this ranking where he's a negative 0.08 EPA per pass, negative 0.03 EPA per dropback. Under pressure, he's stabilized a little bit down to a negative 0.5. So for Jordan Love, that's a good sign because he was really bad in the beginning of the year. But where he does have some opportunity still, and he's just not taking it, 4.3 deep shots per game, good for a negative 0.2 EPA. 3.5 rushes per game, good for a 0.7 EPA. He should be running more. He should be throwing more deep shots or getting a little more success in the deep shots. We'll see if Christian Watson and him can ever connect with Watson having the knee injury. But he doesn't have a touchdown in his deep throws. He's a 12% interception rate in his deep throws. Like he's not doing well with the shit that he could do well with, but he's still doing okay enough on a few plays that the numbers don't fully crater out, don't hit the bottom. So I think Jordan Love is hanging in there. I really wish that he was good. I really wish that he could be protected. He had some time to throw and all of that because it does feel like I think a lot of his issues come down to just that pocket collapses. He doesn't know what to do. It's not great. I think maybe you could coach that out of it. Like screens. They don't run screens to Aaron Jones. I don't know if it's just Jones being hurt with that hamstring thing, but they just don't run plays that keep the pressure off them and keep them clean. And I do think there's a world where Jordan Love can absolutely rise up these rankings and be at least in that Baker Mayfield area, but he just has to get better and has to be more efficient per touch. And it's not going to happen with Christian Watson being uninvolved. Like, frankly, Christian Watson getting deep plays is like a big part of how Jordan Love could succeed. I know, again, I'm another guy I'm biased to because of the bags, but I do think for Jordan Love, like the opportunity is still there for him. He's just got to fucking do something with it, which is tilting. It's very tilting. Guys that are just on the cusp of making the top 10, Kirk Cousins, Jared Goff, Derek Carr, Dak Prescott, Geno Smith. I probably should, and Anthony Richardson hanging in there too. So kudos. Again, every time we say AR's name out loud, you got to give the sign of the cross here. Successful surgery for Anthony Richardson. That's where he's doing it. Stroud off the list after bye. I mean, yeah, it's because of the bye, but also just because he doesn't run enough. So he's gonna have a tough time passing the Cousins, Goff, Carr tier in general, the Stafford tier, especially the Tua tier. But I think if he plays well, he can get closer to being regularly around Stafford, around Purdy, around Tua. But he's not that far off. Again, Stroud, I would have it about 15 or 16. And I will drop the full SPAGS rankings in the pinned comment down below when this video ends. So make sure to check out there if you want to see the full details on everything. All right, let's go over to the wide receivers here. Let me pull it up on the sheet. I appreciate all you guys being here, of course. Let me get this going. But guys, make sure to please subscribe down below. Please hit the like button. Please leave a comment. Let me get a little version. Please do that here. Splash Play on the march to 3K subs. Of course, you guys are seeing my process here in season. Some things go well. Some things, in particular, Showdown, go very well. And some things run poorly. And that's just what football is. Unfortunately, the most variable spot, most volatile sport that you can find. But that's what the process is here on Splash Play, Monday to Friday, 11 a.m. We do the process. We do what we do here. We look at everything. We try to analyze as best we can. It's all I can ever give to you guys. All I can ever promise is put my full ass in everything we do here on Splash Play. Tyreek Hill, number 1. So this is something that jumped out to me. A lot of these guys this week at receivers starting to come back down to normal wide receiver numbers in terms of the EPA metrics, where I talked about, we had guys like Tyreek, guys like Keenan Allen, guys like Nico Collins, who were at like a 0.7 EPA, 0.8 EPA for parts of the season. We're now seeing that stabilize closer to normal numbers, where last year, as I mentioned, Rashid Shaheed led the entire wide receiver position with a 0.77 EPA. And that's a guy who, of course, Rashid Shaheed, the most boom bust last year, 50-yard touchdowns or nothing. It's going to make a lot of sense why he gets there. But besides that, it's like guys like Jalen Waddle at a 0.55, guys like Devontae Smith last year at a 0.36, 0.39, somewhere in that range. So for all these guys who are like elite, high volume receivers to be getting 0.56 EPAs, 0.57 EPAs, like it had to come down a little bit. So that's where I think we're starting to see things stabilize a little bit more in terms of the numbers. But Tyreek still looks great. 0.56 EPA per target, as you can see on the screen, 10.9 intended touches per game, 2.4 deep shots per game, of which he's converting 1.7 of which. So those are the catchable balls. He's catching all of them. Tyreek is doing everything he can with the opportunity he's been given. That's what really stands out to me. He could get more red zone work, only 1.3 red zone targets per game, 0.6 inside the 5-yard line per game. So I guess that's something he could gain on a little bit if Miami's in high leverage spots and uses them intelligently. But Tyreek to me is like the guy that for my best ball portfolio, I know is keeping up a lot of shit. He's, papering over a lot of the damage to the walls that the season has been. Tyreek, I think, is a guy that you can trust in every situation. I would trade from. I would not get rid of him in any situation. Tyreek is just so good in this Miami offense. Like, even if they have weeks of down efficiency going against an Eagles team, I still think I'd want to have more buys in on them than not. And I still think that week 17 Baltimore Miami game is looking even more potentially like a crown jewel that can give you a really big spike week because you're going to see Lamar score on that other side, and Miami's going to have to be pressing action, do the best they can to get guys like Tyreek the ball. Jamar Chase moves up this week because of all the wide receivers being a little bit less efficient overall. Chase, as I've talked about here, I do worry about the efficiency overall, or the opportunity and the efficiency with T. Higgins being back in the mix. Higgins has been egregiously bad. It's actually bad enough to the point that I should look him up just to give you guys a number here. Higgins a negative 0.24 EPA per pass, 7.4 intended touches per game. Last year, he was about 8-ish, I believe, intended touches per game at a 0.3 EPA per target. So he's been egregiously bad compared to what he was last year. I do expect him to get closer to where he was, like a guy at T. Higgins' age, heading into a contract season. There's no reason he should be having the worst year of his career, but he's having it right now. And I think that's been a big thing that benefits Jamar Chase, as he himself has been more efficient, and this Cincinnati offense is not that good. The best hope for Jamar Chase to hold on to this spot is Joe Burrow just getting healthier. We now got through a bye week, and Burrow is starting to show some signs of life there, running around a little bit more, being able to handle the pocket pressure a little bit more. So I think these are things that are going to help out Jamar Chase overall. But in terms of just the pure prospect of it, I think out of all the guys in the top 10, and that might be hard to say, but definitely of a guy to be this highly ranked, I feel like Jamar Chase's position is a little bit fragile just because of the fact that, like, Higgins is going to do something at some point. Mixon, too, is going to do something at some point, even if it's just volume-based. And I think that's where Jamar Chase, like, he can still have the 40-point games here and there, but I think he's going to be closer to kind of a 10 to 20-point guy for the most part, instead of a lot of these guys who are going to give you 30, a lot of weeks in terms of the course of a season. A.J. Brown comes in at number 3, 0.45 EPA per target, 10.6 targets per game, 2.4 deep shots per game, tied for the most in the league, along with Tyreek. So that's a great sign for A.J. Brown. His usage has been great. The spike weeks have been great. The upside's been great, getting 1 red zone target per game as well. A.J. Brown, as we've talked about here, was the thing that we hypothesized earlier on the year on the stream, is that A.J. Brown was becoming the number 1. And the screaming at Jalen Hurts, for whatever a little bitch move that might look like to us as fantasy players who want to see Devontae Smith and Dallas Goedert get there. A.J. Brown's been getting fed like a monster since then. And we also have seen the Eagles sign one of his little pals, Julio Jones, just because they had an empty roster spot. So I think A.J. Brown, I don't see this one moving around too much for him, at least in terms of the opportunity. I do expect Devontae Smith to at some point get a spike week just because he is a talented player. And A.J. Brown's going to draw so much attention that at a certain point, you would think a defense would sell out to stop him and allow Devontae to get loose a little bit more. But for right now, it's just A.J. Brown is seeing single coverage, like for a lot of times here, not even seeing a lot of bracketed coverage. And for him, he's going to smash that every time. So I don't know how that changes besides just teams deciding, hey, we'll let Devontae Smith get his. But the issue is, like, they know Devontae Smith is like a danger to break big plays. So they're still covering him like he's full go and full workload and getting the opportunities he got last year. That's just not been the case of this Eagles offense so far this year. Wish I could have stuck at Hill at 3 and not mix in CMC. He's getting close to 30. Yeah, I mean, look, CMC, I'm never going to begrudge it. There's something I think Liam was talking about on Twitter, too, of just like, why is it that Tyreek and CMC are scoring similar points, but Tyreek's a lot more important to people's advance rates than CMC is? And I think it's because when you get those 12-point receiver weeks, it doesn't matter as much because hopefully you're getting a 30-point, a 20-point week from somebody else, especially if you're drafting, in a certain way where you're taking early wide receiver capital like we advocate here on Splash Play. But I think it's also because, like, when CMC gives you a 12-point week, you could have gotten that 12-point week from anybody from round 10 to round 18. And maybe you could have gotten a 20-point week for anybody round 10 to round 18. For wide receiver, you're just not seeing that as often. So I think that's the main reason why. But to me, Tyreek is like the MVP of best ball. I don't see how that changes necessarily besides him getting hurt. It's just a great offense, great opportunity for him, all that. No, Spags. AJ told Hurts he wasn't allowed to look for Devontae. That's true. He did tell him. He gave Jalen Hurts a little spank on the tush and said, no, 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 you're not allowed to do that. Now Devontae can't get targets ever again, which is tough to see. Puka Nacua comes in at number 4. And I don't know what to make of Puka Nacua. Like I've said it, and I think still the correct take is that he's the Robert Woods to Cooper Kupp and that explosive Rams offense that we saw a couple years ago, where Puka's going to have some good games, a lot more good games going Kupp's way. I still think that's the case. It's just not a lot of red zone work for Puka. 0.1 red zone rushes per game, 0.4 red zone targets, only 1 deep target per game for Puka, but he's just PPRing you to death. Like he's just getting those easy targets over and over and over again. And I think that's something for Puka that's certainly great for the opportunity for him. But I still feel like the spot, him moving up the ranks, him being at number 4 ahead of Keenan Allen, I think is a little fragile, but I do think it speaks to what he's done. Like the fact that an 18th round pick, an undrafted guy in a lot of drafts out there who could be doing this right now, he's paid dividends, tenfold. I showed my best ball teams. One of my best ball teams in the Golden on Underdog is a team with Puka. Puka's given up 120 points to that team where guys like Brandon Ayuk have given 50. Like that's how good Puka's been. So I think it's really hard to undersell what he's been, but I still think there's like a dangerous floor for him where if Kupp is rolling, Puka might not get there. If Kupp is really rolling, Puka's going to have an awful day. And I think that's still a thing that you don't want to see from a guy in the 4 hole, but because the ceiling is so huge, I mean, he'd give you 30 points any week, especially in a week where Kupp is getting covered well. That's something for Puka that I think bodes well. And again, 0.36 EPA per target for him, actually 0.38, EPA per target, 12 targets a game. Crazy workload for Puka that's not getting that much worse. So hard to ignore. Dear wide receiver 2s, please start showing up. Love your biggest hater. Yeah, it's been a year of really consolidating on wide receiver 1s. I don't know why that is. It might be some of the too high safety stuff where this wide receiver 2s aren't able to get downfield as much. That's me speculating, obviously, as a guy who, once again, I'm not holding the ball right now, but there you go. I know ball. But point being, I think that's part of it. But it's odd to see like wide receiver 1s getting fed a lot more this year. Wide receiver 1s being a lot more efficient this year. That speaks to an overarching NFL trend, I think. And it's one where the Higginses, the Devontae Smiths, like these guys look a lot worse than they did last year, where it does feel like the offenses were a little more agnostic and able to go different spots. Keenan Allen coming up next. Keenan Allen, again, getting less efficient by the week, down to 0.46 EPA per target, 11 intended touches per game, 1.5 red zone targets per game would put him in one of the top marks in the league as well. That's pretty good. Just feels like teams, I wouldn't say are figuring it out, but teams are selling out to stop him a little bit more. That's pretty tough for Keenan Allen to overcome, just given his age, given the fact he's a great route runner. But if you're seeing double teams, like route running is only going to do so much for you. So I think that's really the biggest issue with Keenan Allen. When Josh Palmer comes back down to earth, Keenan Allen will probably pop back up. In easy matchups, I think Keenan Allen's still the guy to look for. That red zone work, again, really hard to ignore. But Keenan Allen, to me, I think the bloom coming off the rose a little bit with Keenan Allen, where it's still a great play, but I'm hesitant to run with him in these, like, he's going to be 20% owned at 8,500 on DraftKings. Like, I don't think I'd be inclined to do that quite as much. Hard to advance CMC and elite QB because you need to hit on the like of both Puka and Thielen. Not doing much RB and QB stars next year. Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, that's part of my reason why I didn't like going to elite QB that much. And I get it. I certainly believe Jalen Hurts, again, he's number 1 in the rankings. But week to week, like over the course of a year, Jalen Hurts is going to beat every QB most likely. Week to week, though, you can find guys that can compete with Jalen Hurts. And I think you keep finding those guys week after week after week, and you maybe lose only, out of your 2 QB build or a 3 QB build even, you lose only 3 to 4 weeks of Jalen Hurts. And even then you're losing by 5 to 10 points. It just doesn't justify that ADP difference between any QB and Jalen Hurts. So, I don't want to beat up on Jalen Hurts because he's fucking great, but I think that's sort of the issue with elite QBs overall. Justin Jefferson would be in the spot, but of course, not going to put injured guys in. Adam Thielen, again, looking great on the year, 0.59 EPA per target, 10 intended touches per game. Not getting a lot of deep shots, just 0.3 deep shots per game. 1.2 red zone targets per game is a pretty good mark. Really, the biggest hope for Adam Thielen is one, he's not a great player. Like, I think the EPA metrics do say that he's doing a good job with it, so I guess I shouldn't fully say that. But he's not getting open at a crazy amount. ESPN put some of their new analytics out that showed that Thielen's getting open at an okay rate, but not as good as a lot of other elite guys who are producing like he is. I think Thielen's run pretty hot on touchdowns. I think Thielen has also run pretty hot in his overall catch rate. 83% catch rate for him on the year. Feels like that's got to be due for regression closer to mid-70s, given his depth of target. So I think Thielen's great. Like, I think if you hit on Thielen, more power to you. But I think you have 2 risk points coming up. Is that one, he is probably the most due for negative regression, just in terms of like having mediocre days. Like he hasn't had a lot of mediocre days. He's had as many really great days as he had mediocre days. So that's with his usage profile, it's not going to be there forever. And number 2 is this new OC. So Thomas Brown, former running back, a guy coming from the Rams as well. The big risk would be that he uses him like Cooper Kupp, and then we see Adam Thielen hit another level that didn't seem possible. But the alternative would be that he just gets other guys involved, pushes it downfield to DJ Chark, gets Mingo involved more in the Thielen role. Terrace Marshall is now free to look for a trade. I don't know if the Bucs going to trade for Terrace Marshall, but it does seem like he's not part of the Panthers' plan. So that's one less out that's no longer there. So that's pretty tough as well. I don't know how Thielen fails, but I do think there's maybe a few fungible points right now that could fuck up Thielen that are not really accounted for currently. And people who are happy about Thielen, I think are going to go la, 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 and don't want to hear it. But like, he's just due to come back down to earth, I think. Even if he still has a great year, he can still have a great year, but he's due to come back down to earth. Stephon Diggs, also a guy coming back down to earth, 0.25 EPA per target now. He was at a 0.38 EPA per target last year, so that's not the best thing to see him getting less efficient as time goes on. 11-10 touches per game, that's pretty good for him. But again, the lack of deep shots, 1.6 deep shots, doesn't sound like a big thing to say that, oh, Tyreek is getting 2.4 deep shots per game. A.J. Brown's getting 2.4 deep shots per game. But it is still like, 33% less targets that he's getting downfield, Stephon Diggs is per target or per game. It's not great. And I think he's really suffering from this Bills offense that we talked about earlier. It's not as aggressive downfield, or at least hasn't been with a lot of the 2 tight end sets they've been playing. I don't know if that changes necessarily. Maybe the Bills get more desperate and they do force it downfield more. Again, I do think the Diggs and Allen parts go hand in hand. If Allen is going to push it downfield more, he's going to be the guy he's been in the past, Diggs is going to look better. If he keeps doing what he's been doing, I don't think Diggs is going to have a big increase besides just him being good week to week. And we saw it against the Dolphins. Like if there is a big reason to push him into action, give him a lot of work and get him really involved, the Bills can do it. If there isn't, they're not going to do it. And I think that's sort of the tough part for Diggs that makes him a little more like a Devontae Adams than a Tyreek Hill, which isn't a bad thing. It's just not a great thing, I think, every single week. Amon-Ra St. Brown and Cooper Kupp closing it out here. Amon-Ra St. Brown, 11.7 targets. Biggest flaw with him is just he's getting targeted too close to the line of scrimmage, 6.8 air yards per target. By comparison, Tyreek Hill, 11.3 air yards per target. Jamar Chase, 8.2, and that, again, he's on the lower end. A.J. Brown, 13.4. Keenan Allen, 10.1. Just that loss of 3 yards of depth is like, that adds up when you are a guy getting 11 targets per game. That's 33 yards if you were to catch every target. So that's a lot that he's just missing out on per there. And also, it's the run game commitment overall for the Lions. Maybe that changes a little bit in some certain situations. If Montgomery gets stonewalled and he's back in, or Gibbs has to be the back for a little bit longer. I think Amon-Ra still has good game-to-game ceiling, especially in full-point PPR. And halfway PPR, though, 1.2 red zone targets per game. The touchdown equity is not fantastic. Like, I think there's a lot of things here where he's not getting the huge crush of yardage. He's not getting a lot of touchdown equity. That sort of makes it hard for him to make that leap to that top tier where these guys are just getting touchdowns, or tons of yardage. And I think that's where Amon-Ra, his best shot is a lot of yardage, but he's just not getting enough work. Cooper Kupp, I think we saw the downside this past week. Still 0.35 EPA per target is pretty good, given that he was a negative guy last year, so more efficient. 9.3 instead of touches per game, 1 red zone target per game, 2 deep shots per game, which is kind of surprising to see for Kupp, but good usage for him. The usage is okay. Like, I think Cooper Kupp is fine. I just think it's really one of those ping pong things with him and Puka, and if they both get there, then Stafford's going to be your winning QB for that week, no matter what the situation is. Puka and Kupp go scorched earth if/when the Rams regress in rushing production in red zone, especially when Kyron is out. That's true. I mean, the alternative would be that they just don't get as successful in the red zone. Like, I think that's the part that's tough, because I know I tend to think a lot like Tyler's talking about here, where, okay, this star running back, this guy they lean on, is out, so they're going to do better in this other facet of the game. And sometimes the reason that they're going to like a Kyron Williams is because they can't get the success in the red zone they would have had normally. I'm not saying that's the case, but sometimes it just means more field goals. So that's the other part of it that I agree, like, that could go their way a little bit more. But I think it's also possible you just see just them kicking more because they can't get the easy touchdowns they would get with Kyron in the past. All right, there we go. Got tight ends coming up once more here, and let's do it. We got Taylor Swift on the screen. Taylor Swift, honestly, the biggest value in tight end is Taylor Swift. I think we can all agree. It's hard to ignore the numbers he's put up. The fact he's averaging like 100 yards per game with Taylor Swift in attendance. I mean, if there's ever, again, we said it yesterday, and I want to keep making this a thing on Splash Play, even though we are probably the horniest fantasy football show around. Power of the pussy fully in play for Travis Kelce here. He is crushing, man. Like, it's hard to look at his numbers and not say like something otherworldly is contributing to his success this year, but 0.47 EPA per target. So he's basically as good as Keenan Allen, let's say, as a tight end, which is crazy. 0.47 EPA per target. 9.8 intended touches per game, 1.7 red zone targets per game, 0.5 inside the 5-yard line per game. The one thing that he's not hitting on is his deep shots. He's getting 0.3 deep targets per game, hasn't caught a single one. If he starts hitting on that, I don't know what he's going to do. I don't know, he's going to put up 50. I don't know where the ceiling is for Travis Kelce. He is now, I said this last week, it's Kelce number 1, Andrews number 2, Hockenson number 3, and there's a big gulf between each one. It's getting bigger by the week. Like, Andrews had a fucking great week, and now Kelce still pulled further ahead of him. It's insane. It's just insane production by him. He's great. I still don't know if the math of it all, if he's going to be the guy that helps you actually win in best ball. Like, he needs to crush in week 17 and then also keep going every week and keep doing this to get you to advance where you need to go. And then you have to beat all the receivers and the running backs in that range. But Kelce, to me, is just like, it's incredible he's doing this at his age. It's incredible he's doing this with all the pressure and the fucking media attention. Like, this is a great year. This is an all-time tight end year right now. And that's with missing one game. It's pretty crazy. Did I hear the P word? Bonk myself. Oh, okay. Here, I'll give myself a bonk here. I guess whenever we say power of the pussy, we do have to go to the old bonk dog here. We've gone to horny jail. There we go. Thoughts on the 2772 0RB build? These are by far my best teams. Big Lenny. 2772 0RB. Yes, I think I said this yesterday, Lenny, on the Best Ball Review Show, which sad to not have Lenny there for it. But yes, I do think getting 7 running backs is going to look pretty good. And again, it's just a matter of the configurations. Like, we did do the Best Ball Review Show. I encourage you guys to check it out if you're in the Best Ball streets. Like, we saw the bad parts of 0RB where it was like, what was the team I had? Tank Bigsby, Roshan, Kendre Miller. Like, I had all these guys that just have either done a little bit or done nothing yet. Like, there's a scary side of 0RB, but if you hit 0RB right, that means getting David Montgomery. That means getting DeAndre Swift. That means getting Brian Robinson. That means getting like a Devon Achane, obviously. A lot of guys that would have made a lot of sense. So yeah, 2772 is good. And I think for me as well, especially as a guy who prefers 0RB or hero RB builds, I would definitely go more like at least 6 running backs next year. Ideally 7, I think would be the move. All right. Let's go to Mark Andrews at number 2. Again, Andrews looking great too. 0.43 EPA per target, 6.7 targets per game. The issue is he's getting 3.1 less targets per game than Travis Kelce. So you can't overcome that. He's playing his mind out, but he's a good mark behind Kelce for that reason. Getting similar red zone work, 1.3 red zone targets per game. Andrews also has a red zone rush on the year. So that's one thing he has over Kelce that Kelce does not have. But besides that, though, like, these guys are running about as hot as they can. Andrews playing well, Kelce playing well. Andrews going to be a clear number 2 for me. I don't see how he beats Travis Kelce on the year, barring injury, but I think you'll be okay. I think relative to ADPs as well and where Andrews is getting drafted, Andrews probably a guy that's going to help you advance and have a shot at winning in week 17. I think more than Kelce does, even though Kelce is a greater player. So that's the push-pull of best ball, where even sometimes you have the best players, and it doesn't necessarily help you out as much as it could because the guy who's number 2 is just good enough to make number 1 not look fantastic. I think that's Mark Andrews' best play right now, is that he's just good enough to keep Travis Kelce like in range if you have Andrews. All right, TJ Hockenson, number 3. Again, big gulf behind him, behind Andrews. 0.13 EPA per target. 8.4 targets per game. So he's actually getting more targets per game, but still grading out lower than Andrews, which does speak to how efficient Andrews has been. But yeah, I mean, no, nothing to really nickel and dime about Hockenson. 1 red zone target per game. He's just less efficient. Obviously, with Jefferson being out, he's going to get a lot of work. I like Hockenson. I have no issue with him, but he's just not as good as Andrews. And he's definitely not as good as Travis Kelce. Can he give you spike weeks that are similar to them? Absolutely. But I think really with Addison emerging, I guess the push-pull of this all might be that you see Addison emerge this week. Defenses probably sell out, stop Addison a little bit more. That opens up some opportunity for Hockenson perhaps to have the ceiling game coming up for the Vikings. But then you need the Vikings to actually be good again, and that's the part that I don't know is going to be there. But I think Hockenson is fine. Like, he's a good tight end 3. It's just like these guys were drafted where they were for a reason. And I think still, I don't know, I'd rather have Kelce, I think, than Hockenson, but it's possible to have a Hockenson team beat out a Kelce team because you're just getting better guys across 4 rounds. And same thing for an Andrews team. With where you drafted Hockenson, I think you have to feel pretty good about him being number 3. It's hard to imagine him losing to Waller, I think. So this is probably your top 3, and it's going to hold as your top 3 at tight end. Darren Waller, 0.32 EPA per target. Big signs of life from Darren Waller. 7 intended touches per game, 0.6 red zone targets per game. I've got it on the screen. He's another guy that just needs Daniel Jones to never come back because this has not been as good for him with Daniel Jones. Tyrod can handle pressure. Daniel Jones cannot. That is the big difference between them. So I think for Waller, you're getting the best run out you can expect from him. Puts up just shy of 20 points this past week, I believe. So that's not that bad for Waller either. It's probably pretty close to your ceiling. 1 more touchdown on there. He gets to the mid-20s. That's probably the true ceiling for him. But I think for him, he's getting about as good as he can get. And if Jones comes back in, I do expect him to kind of come back down and maybe fall behind Laporta, but still feels pretty good. Here's all right. Here's an interesting question I'll take here. AKA Koopa, have too many players projected very good points. How do you go about deciding who to keep / trade away? I mean, you don't have to necessarily trade anybody. You just have to make the decisions week to week. But you should try to consolidate your players and get one even greater player. It'd be the best thing to do for yourself. But that's just general kind of season-long strategy. Sam Laporta coming in at number 4. Again, Laporta just doing what he has to do every week. 0.16 EPA per target, 7 targets per game, 0.6 red zone targets per game. So the same as Waller. He's fine. Like, I think Laporta's, for a rookie, he's fantastic. For a tight end, he's a fine tight end. Would you rather have Taysom Hill? Maybe. Would you rather have some guy, at least as long as Juwan Johnson remains out? Maybe. But I think for Sam Laporta, this run out for him is about as good as you can get, about as good as you could have hoped for. So Laporta, I have nothing nickel and dime about him besides the fact that he's not immediately Travis Kelce, not immediately Mark Andrews, but still a very good player, just one that clearly a secondary, tertiary option in this Detroit offense. But at least he's not Jameson Williams because he's got that going for him as it relates to being in that offense. Evan Ingram coming in behind him. Ingram just not getting a red zone target. It's going to hurt his usage overall. He now has to break a big play to get there for where he needs to get in terms of having a ceiling outcome. At a certain point, he's going to get a red zone target, you would think, but this team is pot committed to running Travis Etienne. It's also got enough guys to feed targets to that maybe this keeps holding up for a little bit longer, but it is a very big strategic weakness for Evan Ingram. He's just not getting red zone work. As a tight end, you need to get red zone work because you got to get that one touchdown a game, or at least, one touchdown to have a ceiling game. He's not doing that. So I don't think that it disqualifies him from having the ceiling that he had in best ball last year. But I do think for Ingram, it's a bad sign for now. And I think it's one that, the usage is great. 7.3 targets per game, great. 0.08 EPA per target, fine. But he's just not getting the red zone work, and that's going to hold him back. Dallas Goedert, 0.16 EPA per target, 5.9 targets per game, 1 red zone target per game. Dallas Goedert belongs here. I do believe that he could move ahead of Ingram and probably Laporta as well. And I would think Waller too. But with A.J. Brown commanding such a big share, we need to see A.J. Brown come down for Goddard to come up. And when is A.J. Brown going to come down? I don't know. I don't know if there's any sort of a way to really target that one and give you guys any real insight. Logan Thomas, shockingly good, 0.2 EPA per target, 0.2, in case I didn't enunciate that enough, 5.3 targets per game, 0.7 red zone targets per game. Again, he's just a part of a good high pass rate over expectation offense, not a good offense, but a high pass rate over expectation offense. Logan Thomas can get there in really friendly matchups, ones where McLaurin gets sold out to get stopped, ones where Jahan Dotson keeps being Jahan Dotson. Curtis Samuel doesn't have the outlier days that he's had so far this year. I don't have any issue with Logan Thomas, but to me, he's kind of just the guy in this group here where there's a lot of guys on a pretty close range of next to each other. So Logan Thomas, Dalton Schultz, Kyle Pitts, Jake Ferguson, George Kittle, all these guys kind of crushed together in the same range. And for Kittle, he's the one guy that's really efficient amongst them because Dalton Schultz is a 0.13 EPA per target, Logan Thomas 0.2, Kyle Pitts 0.07, Ferguson 0.16, Kittle 0.47. So Kittle can make a big leap, but he's got to get more work. And the 4.6 intended targets per game for George Kittle, just not enough to do that. That's sort of the biggest issue for him. I will highlight Jake Ferguson real fast, even though he's not in the top 10. Ferguson still 1.8 targets per game in the red zone, most at tight end. So Ferguson, a player that's really outperformed his lot in life this year. Ferguson, to me, a guy that's still, because of this Dallas offense, because you have Tony Pollard there, because you have other weapons they can go to. I don't have the most faith in the world in Ferguson, but most red zone targets at a position is hard to ignore. And Ferguson can give you a 2-touchdown game one of these weeks. It's just, when's it going to be? I don't know. If he's in a good match, if you were playing the Cowboys, who were terrible against tight end, you'd play Jake Ferguson. Unfortunately, he's on their team. So for Ferguson, though, like there's a spike week coming from at some point. If there's a week that he's low owned, the salary makes sense. I'd plug in some Jake Ferguson just because of the fact that that's Travis Kelce. That's better than Travis Kelce red zone work for a guy who's not Travis Kelce, and that certainly stands out. McBride this week with Ertz out. I mean, McBride's going to take a leap upwards. Ertz, though, has been coming back down to earth. Was down to a negative 0.3 EPA per target, 6 targets per game, 1.1 red zone targets. So theoretically, we'll vacate some amount of those to McBride. McBride on the year has been more efficient, 0.25 EPA per target, 3 targets per game. No red zone targets for him yet on the year. So if he just gets... If he gets half of that Ertz work and he gets to the same 6 intended targets per game, he probably is close to the top 10. I don't think he's like an outlier guy. I know, our pal Evan Silva always talks about him being a Mackey Award winner. He was a great college tight end. I think he's still an acceptable pro tight end. But to me, he's always been kind of like that Cade Otton type where I don't think he's like a player with a ton of juice. If he's in the right offense, it's running well, he can get there. I think a Dalton Schultz type would be a good way to say that. So I think he does get close to the top 10 moving forward. but I don't think he takes a big leap. Like, I don't think he gets a Sam Laporta level, but I could be wrong about that because a lot of sharp people do like McBride. And I know for me, he's grading out better than I would have thought, honestly, looking up his numbers, but we'll see how that increases when he gets to better volume. All right, there we go. And then Carlos summed it up well. Trade away what you have an abundance of if you need a player from a certain position. That is a good way to look at everything redraft-wise. But there we go, guys. That's it. That's your SPAGS rankings for the week. Down once again, a lead mean hour. So what can you do for me? I know what you can do. You can subscribe down below. You can hit that like button. You can leave a comment as well if you're watching after the fact. And again, check that pinned comment down below when this video ends. I'm going to quickly try to export my list and drop it in there. You're going to be able to see all the SPAGS rankings for everybody, along with a lot of the other stats I look at, my routes per game, my deep targets per game, the red zone rushes, the EPA metrics that I get from Sports Info Solutions, which I would still say pay for if you can get it. But I do put it in one clean spot for you guys here. So check that out. And of course, if you want to get all of my data, hit the join button down below, $4.99 a month. Of course, we'll get you guys the data sheet that is so important for a lot of people's success, apparently, that I've been hearing about. So appreciate you guys who have been telling me that. We'll be dropping that on Saturdays. So check that out, of course, by hitting that join button down below. Get to be a part of the Squirt Squad. No better community in fantasy sports. And again, follow me at Chris Spags. Follow the show at Splash Play Pod. Come back tomorrow. Showdown time. Bills and Bucks coming up. We are going to find some edges to try to take advantage of there. And check me out later today. Stochastic NBA Deeper Dive with my pal Josh Engelman. I think we have 12 NBA games, which I got to put the data together for, but I'll be doing that later today. So get your NBA Spags as well. That reserve signed by the basketball, no longer reserved. I'm back in the NBA streets doing it. But appreciate all you guys hanging out with me here. Thank you guys for being a friend. And of course, I will see you guys tomorrow. So enjoy your days. Good luck. Bye.